Greetings, Off-Season After Dark fans. Glad to have you here for episode 9. And we're bringing it all back home this episode. We are having our first SEC-focused episode in our tour around the conferences. Many of you have been with us from Big Ten to Mountain West, ACC, Conference USA, American. We've done most of them. And today we hit where it just means more, the SEC. We have Landon Tucker here from the My Dawgs pod, where we will be talking Mississippi State Bulldogs, a fan base and team who hopefully will rebound this year. But, we may not be hearing as much about them. That roster has a lot of new faces. That we talked about this on the group show last week. About 80% of that roster is in year 1 or 2. And I really was interested when Jeff Levy said that at SEC Media Days. They got some new coaches in. Me, a former Minnesota guy, was happy to see Phil Odo, former Viking, as the new O-line coach. But Landon, glad to have you here. Tell the audience a little bit about yourself, where they can find you, and what you've been doing with the Dawgs and all that stuff.
Mike, man, I'm so glad to be here. And look, we're right here. It's the later half of July. So we're almost into August. That means we have just a little bit more time until we actually kick off. So we're in this kind of middle part, but man, we're almost to the best part of the year. I'm Landon. I host My Dawgs pod on MPW Digital, and we're a Mississippi State podcast, and we cover Mississippi State. Got the privilege to cover them at SEC Media Days last week, so got to see a lot of the SEC and a lot of the players that are kind of being spoken about often with Arch Manning and Garrett Nussmeier and a lot of different hype for the SEC. But there's also some competition all of a sudden from the Big Ten, and it's almost kind of like this threatening thing going back and forth. So I'm excited to see how that will play out this season.
Absolutely.
But honestly, Mike, I'm just ready to kick the ball off, man. I'm ready to get going.
Yeah, so you guys have an interesting opener, and a lot of coaches and players I know well. So you guys open with Southern Miss, who Charles Huff was at Marshall last year, a good portion of the coaches, and that roster was, Braylon Braxton was our QB last year. A couple of their DBs were projected Sun Belt first team all conference. So that will be, I think, a fun season opener on the road in Hattiesburg, which kind of surprised me. But their roster was as turned over as your guys was last year, really. It's a totally new ball club they're going to have in Hattiesburg. So what's the buzz down there about that season opener in the beginning of the season?
Well, Mississippi State has played Southern Miss fairly often. It's a game and kind of a rivalry in the state of Mississippi that's played fairly, like I mentioned, fairly often, and honestly, a pretty consistent history. It's not something that Ole Miss, for whatever reason, I don't know the reason, but not really a game that they've played as often. They're more so likely to play Memphis, which is right, kind of a little bit north of where Oxford is, which is in Tennessee, but kind of that borderline.
Yeah. Arkansas State makes sense for them to being up in that direction.
Yeah, that's right, going right up that way. But for Jeff Levy, Mississippi State, it's kind of a tricky opener because, as you mentioned, it's on the road in Hattiesburg, and Charles Huff really did a great job with that Marshall program and brought his best players with him. You mentioned the defensive backs, Josh Moten, a cornerback that a lot of people wanted in the portal, Mississippi State included, went to Southern Miss. And so I think he's going to do a really good job in taking that gig. Very happy for him. But, for Mississippi State, from everyone else's perspective outside of Starkville, if you go, all the way west to a little city called Vegas, Mississippi State's total win projection is 3.5. So over under 3.5, which is pretty sad to even say out loud. But a part of that is looking at their SEC schedule is obviously very difficult as always. They have the 6th toughest schedule in the nation, but that's before you even get to the Arizona States and Georgia and Tennessee and Texas and all those people. They do go on the road in Hattiesburg for game number 1, and for State, if they lose that opening game, they play Arizona State the very next week. And it just gets harder and harder as it goes. So a lot of expectations in that game number 1 for Jeff Levy and Mississippi State.
You figure, looking at that schedule, you're counting on beating Alcorn. Every other game, though, you'll have to show up for. And that's probably the way it should be. I mean, it's if you're playing, decent teams, and I feel like the G5 is better than it's ever been. There are a lot of really good G5 coaches out there, and we're getting guys who pre-portal era and long ago, they would have just been backups. And when the power teams could have larger roster sizes, that's not the case anymore. The talent is getting spread out more, so you're getting better G5 ball. And I think Northern Illinois is on that schedule. And after the Toledo game last year, I wouldn't, they'll want to get that W at home for sure. They won't be overlooking them. And after Northern Illinois, conference schedule starts with Tennessee. Is A&M or Florida the second? I forget the order of those.
Yeah, it's at A&M, and then it's at Florida the very next week.
Okay. And then Texas at home, and that won't be an easy one either.
Right. But, the thing is, Mike, at the end of the day, like Mississippi State can certainly complain about the schedule, but what's the alternative? If you're in the SEC, it's just going to be a part of it. So you're going to have to be competitive. And if you didn't have the 6th toughest schedule, you might have the 20th hardest schedule. Yeah. Either way, you got to find a way to win those games. And so Jeff Lebby's got to find a way to win this season. A part of that is he brought in, as you mentioned at the very start of the show, a ton of new players. Yeah. And think for a moment for the Cinderella from last season in the college football playoff. Arizona State came out of nowhere, but the year before that, they were 3-9. And Coach Dillingham turned that roster over with 60 new players. Jeff Lebby's done the same thing, 59 new players this season. And a part of that,
I didn't know it was that many. That's a ton.
A ton between the recruits and the transfer portal. And you needed that, right? Some people were seniors. Some people just need to kind of move on. But one of the best players that they got, it was a guy that was a Sun Belt all freshman player. And honestly, an all nation name, Fluff Bothwell. From Aniana, Alabama, one of the best names in the business. Mississippi State has Fluff Bothwell. They have another guy named Stonka Burnside, and they have a defender named Red Hibbler. So, in terms of names, Mississippi State's right up there at the top. Wins might be a different story, but names, they're going to win that, that competition. Yeah. So anyway, Jeff Lebby's brought in a lot of talent to hopefully reverse that record.
Yeah, and I do think with the influx of talent, Shapen will be better. Fluff, obviously you would mention him. And then, you also have Brennan Thompson from Oklahoma, receiver, Aiden Williams, Jerron Glover. There'll be some other receivers. I don't know who will specifically start. I feel like Thompson will, and then Evans, Mosley, Marcus Allen, a few of those guys could be that starter. We're not positive. But from your perspective, what would a successful season be this year?
I'll tell you, Mike, that I've been asked that question probably more than any this offseason. And to be realistic, because so many people want to know, like, what is the best case scenario for Mississippi State? Because they lived the worst case scenario last year. They were 2-10, worst season since 2003. I think the best case scenario for Mississippi State, just the absolute everything goes just right, would be 5-7. Yeah. It's missing a bowl game again. And before last season, they had not missed a bowl game in 13 years. Just very consistent. Maybe not maybe your average or above average SEC program, not at the top, but they at least were able to make a bowl game. And State's been at kind of the bottom tier of the SEC lately. I think 5-7, that means that they ended up winning 2 SEC games, or pardon me, at least one other. Am I right? Yeah. 2.
If they win 5, it would be 2 conference games. Assuming they lose to Arizona State, it would be 2 conference.
Yeah, that would assume there. And so that means, okay, what did you beat? Did you beat Tennessee? Did you beat Arkansas? Did you beat Missouri? So did you beat Ole Miss at the very end of the season?
As poor as they've been, the Egg Bowl is usually a relatively competitive game. Maybe you get
very odd. Yeah, two years ago, Mississippi State's 5-7. Ole Miss had won 10 games, and Ole Miss scores in the fourth quarter to make it just a 10-point game at the end. Last season, Mississippi State's winning 14-0 in the first quarter. So you're right; it's anybody's game, regardless of the talent level.
Yeah, and one of the tough things for them too is you typically, in the position they're in, you'd rather have those weaker teams at home to really boost your chances of winning. Well, they're home games. You have Ole Miss and the 3 teams that made the playoffs last year from the conference. So even the home games, like, you're not getting any favors there. But I think you're right that say you somehow get a 6th win and go to a bowl game, that's the dream. If you get 5, that's a really good season. That's meeting the goal. Now at 4-8, it's we got better against this schedule. It's not terrible. And I think if you say you get to 4 and that's it, which might be fairly likely, you at least have to feel some promise going into next year, I think. Now, if you only get 2 or 3, you're thinking, is Lebby really the guy? So I think those might be the margins there.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. It's kind of like you think of somebody in a job performance, like, they start a season, they take over a terrible situation. The first quarter of sales, man, things get slightly better. There's a lot of changes. The next quarter goes around. There's a little bit of improvement, but you'd like to see a little bit more. But by that third quarter, they should kind of should have policies in place. Should kind of figure out what they're doing. Yeah. That's kind of where they are with Jeff Lebby. So very interesting to see what year 2 will hold.
Agree. And yeah, I like the hire when they made it. He's obviously, this is his first head coaching job, but he has been very successful as an assistant coach in UCF, Ole Miss, Oklahoma. Obviously was at Baylor when they were among the top 10 teams in the country multiple years in a row. So I think, he's a guy who, say he fails and he's gone in a couple of years, he probably gets another chance down the road. I think people will say he was in a bad situation. Let's let him mature and grow a little bit. Hopefully that doesn't happen. Even like my Ole Miss guy, he won't root for State, but he said, it's better when they're good too, is, how he would say it. So, they're a fun team when they're good, going back to the Jackie Sherrill, Joe Lee Dunn years from a long time ago. But even Leach had them good. When you talked about the last time they missed a bowl game, was that the Sylvester Croom years? I figured it was.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, that 2008. So Sylvester Croom's last year, State ended up going 4-8. And yeah, that was it. Then all of a sudden, no, pardon me. Sorry. It was Dan Mullen's first year, 2009. He went 5-7.
Okay.
And just barely missed a bowl game too. Like it inched out a couple of losses to Tim Tebow and company. But yeah, that was the last time. Then all of a sudden it was 13 straight years. And then Mike Leach passes away in the very next year. Just everything's just kind of tough, and they ended up missing a bowl game.
That was a tough year. Yeah. One of the, in talking a lot of coaching stuff, that kind of being one of my main things, I wanted to, kind of talk about that a little bit. At the time, nobody foresaw that coming, but the Zach Arnett stuff specifically is what I am getting at. I even said this at the time of the hire. Why didn't they just make him interim for a year instead of making him the full-time right away? To me, they weren't in a rush to do that. You name him interim, you still probably keep a lot of the roster and the assistant coaches. Then you go into that next year knowing we're going to have a search, but Arnett could still be a candidate if he does well. At the time, was it popular, I guess I should say, and how did that, obviously we know how it ended, but what was the mood like when that happened?
Yeah, so something several people forget is in that time, Mississippi State actually was without an athletic director. John Cohen had just left to go to Auburn.
Okay.
And so it was there was no, and had taken several other of his deputy director and several of the associates. Okay. So Mississippi State was really on a bones crew because they're searching for an athletic director. Yeah. Mike Leach passes away. And so the people who were in the position, I think what most people were writing about, they were covering it at that time, said that they felt like they needed just some sort of level of stability. And at that point, Zach Arnett had been there since Lebby had gotten there, or probably not Lebby, since Leach had gotten there. Yeah. And so this would provide some sort of stability for the players and for the coaches that were there, and then also the recruits that were incoming, to make sure they did not just lose everybody all at once. And yeah, I mean, hindsight, yeah, you kind of make them interim. But in that time, everything's highly emotional. Again, you think about the players.
Yeah.
This might be the first time they've
And
lost someone in their
and
life.
I felt like it may have been too emotionally driven at the time.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
it was. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And in some sense that set them back instead of hiring somebody, that was a little more equipped for the job than Zach Arnett was.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So I had forgotten about the AD turnover at the time. I knew they had lost him. I didn't know we were talking about those things dissecting at like the worst time of the year for colleges to be having that stuff going on. So, in terms of Mississippi State, I'll kind of put you on the spot a little bit here for this one. Who's one new face on the roster that you're the most excited about to watch this year, other than Bothwell? You already mentioned him. Who would be one more that you really are excited to see?
Man, it's a toss-up between Brennan Thompson, the wide receiver who played at Texas and Oklahoma. Jeff Lebby said at media days he loved Thompson last season in Oklahoma because several times he got very open, and for whatever reason, the ball just couldn't get to him. You can kind of read between the lines there. But he loves the way he plays there in the slot. He's incredibly fast. And so I think Jeff Lebby loves the thought of having him on the team. But also, to me, is Kamario Taylor, who's a quarterback.
Yeah.
Blake Shapen has unfortunately been injured, very injury prone in his career. His first season's the only season that he has not been without injury, and that was the season he took Baylor to the Big 12 championship. But every single season since then, it's ended in injury. Kamario Taylor is a top 75 overall player last year, the best player in Mississippi, and he's been committed to Mississippi State for several years through the droughts. And getting to cover spring practice, Mike, he looks the absolute part. Really tall, like really big quarterback, insanely athletic. And Luke Kromenhoek, the former 5-star from Florida State, the quarterback, the redshirt freshman, transferred in this season. And even watching them in spring practice, Kromenhoek's got all the even higher talent star-wise than Kamario Taylor does. But Kamario Taylor's a star. It's just kind of a matter of time of when he's going to play in Starkville.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, I think that's a good one. I think for me, it's probably Jalen Smith, who I think will start at middle linebacker, Tennessee transfer. And that's a guy who, with a lot of new D linemen in front of him, hopefully they can take up those blockers and, enable him to get a lot of tackles, which I think he'll be capable of. He was a pretty highly touted recruit. And I think Smith will be a guy that if you're going to play good D and stop the run, he'll need to be involved and play well.
He will. I'll give you one more. This just kind of for fun for people to root for. So Mississippi State last season had, and this is not a typo or an error, as a team had 6 total sacks last season. One of the worst defenses Mississippi State quite literally has ever fielded. Yeah. Really had trouble. So in the portal, Jeff Lebby and company, they went overboard, oversigned because they hopefully somebody's going to hit. And I kid you not, there is a player that was a fairly highly talented recruit, 4-star recruit at Alabama, defensive lineman, didn't work out, who was working overnight in a factory. And Jeff Lebby called him and asked if he wanted to come play defensive line at Mississippi State. And his name's Jamil Burrows. And
wasn't he also at Miami, Burrows?
He was. Yes, yeah. You're exactly right. You're exactly right. He transferred to Miami, didn't work out there. Kind of left football, was working overnight, and Jeff Lebby calls him on the phone and said, "Hey, do you want to come play back in the SEC?" Awesome. And his the news thus far out of the spring is that he is surprising people for someone who's out of football, who have been out of football for a minute, and honestly, just a guy to root for in general. Like, what a cool story to think about. Absolutely. Guys just kind of chilling, working, and an SEC coach calls you. Like, what if he ends up doing something out of it? Just kind of a guy to root for, even if you're not a fan of Mississippi State.
That's awesome. That's a good story. I will definitely pay attention to him and, what he does there. And talk about a large human. He is absolutely massive, too. Burrows is. I know we're about 330 pounds, 6'3", they have him listed at. So that's but are we should we move on to the coaches of the SEC? One of our usual segments.
Let's do it, man.
Perfect. So one of our usual, topics here is we'll go through the, ranking the coaches for each conference. So for the power conferences, as with this one, I don't make the list. For the G5 ones, I do that in my writing for Mike Farrell. But for this one, obviously, you can see it's Chris Phillips, and this was the pre-SEC Media Days head coach rankings. And I think zero surprise at number one. I don't know any list of the SEC that's not going to have Kirby first. And if you're doing a national one, you're probably going to have Kirby first. He's well deserved to be there. And I think I personally would have Sark at number two. I think a lot of people would. I feel like that next group, though, that 2 to 7, could be a lot of mix and match in there, and a lot of different iterations there. So I'll say for me, my top 3 would be Smart, Sarkisian, and then I had DeBoer at third in mine. I mean, we're forgetting how recently the guy made a national title game, and he still did win 9 games last year. We're not talking about some guy that fell off a ton and they were terrible when he got to Alabama.
Yeah. You're exactly right. And it's funny. I live in Tuscaloosa, and I got to tell you though, Mike, yeah, you're coming at this, from a good perspective, but the folks here that are so obsessed with winning and Nick Saban, if they heard that he was third on any sort of poll, I don't know if they'd buy into it, man. But that's their perspective. 9 wins for them, is firing range.
Yeah. My question wouldn't be they're wrong. It would be, who are you putting ahead of him? And then I would tell you why I wouldn't do that, is how I would go about that.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. I'll ask you this: why at this moment? Why Kalen over Brian Kelly?
That's a very good one. Kelly's also a guy who I like more than most people do, as much as he rubs. So I had him number 4.
Okay. Yeah, and just like you said, there's so much back and forth, like 1 and 2. Yeah.
Yeah. Kelly is the winningest coach at the most storied program in the history of college football. Or one of the 2 most, at Notre Dame. I think they're going to be good this year. He took over when he took over LSU, there were 35 scholarship guys on the roster, and they didn't have a QB. And they won the division his first year. That was really impressive. Now, they regressed a little bit last year. Losing the opener was a bad loss. And, they were very inconsistent at times last year, in some of their games. I mean, they had the 3-game stretch where you lose to A&M, Bama, and Florida in a row. But for me, it's, DeBoer and Kelly, there's not a lot to separate them. I think it's just the recency in making a national title game and having a really good season at Washington. And that wasn't a fluke. I'll sometimes get it on Twitter. Well, it was in a weak conference. No, the Pac-12 was really good that year. There was a lot of talent there in their last year as a conference. So DeBoer's, and he's won everywhere. Both of those guys have. They've won at every school they've been at. So that's why I had them at, respectively 3 and 4, but why I would give DeBoer just a little bit of a nudge. Who would your top 3 be?
Yeah, honestly, I think, Kirby 1, Sark 2. I don't really think there's any sort of question there. I think that's pretty solid. Lane Kiffin is a really good, really good coach. I think I would place Kelly above him, even though, look, I think the thing Kelly gets a lot of hate for is the program where he is. The expectations are so sky high, and it's not like he's gone 7 and 6. Like you just mentioned, the first year in the league, he won it, and he beat Alabama, and he beat Nick Saban. Like he's done some very good things. So I would probably put Kelly 3 there, and then put Kiffin right behind him. But
Kelly's 3 years there. 10 wins, 9 wins. We're not talking about somebody that's fallen off. Yeah,
absolutely. Can we talk about the bottom half?
We can. So you may not want to hear me say this, I think you have to have Jeff Lebby last at this point.
I agree. I agree with you.
Yeah. So one of my scandalous takes, the guy I have at second to last is Clark Lee. He's had one good year. I mean, Vandy was, everybody said, oh, they were surprising, that they were solid last year. They were 7-6 and lost to Georgia State that won 4 games. They were an average football team, which they'd been so bad is why we said they were good. Nobody's got more miles off of one win against Alabama than Vanderbilt did and Diego Pavia did last year. I'm being a hater there to some extent, but I mean, Clark Lee, 2 wins, 5 wins, 2 wins, 7 wins. He's 16-33 as a head coach in 4 years. Now, I will say, if they have a good year this year, I will significantly raise him up this list, because if he gets them to go to 2 bowl games in a row, that's very impressive. I'm not sure it happens, but I will absolutely give Clark Lee his credit if they win games this year.
Yeah, I love that take. I think you're exactly right.
Yeah.
It is. It's one great year, and it's one. I think the thing is, and I say great year. It's a great year in terms of Vanderbilt standards.
Yeah.
No one else on this list would it be considered. I mean, like maybe Jeff Lebby because of such a poor year, but yeah, you're exactly right. 11's pretty high, but then you start looking at it and go, okay, well, like is Brent Venables better than him? Like, I don't know.
So I have Venables one higher at 14. Yeah. And that's another one that could change after this year. I think Oklahoma is going to be pretty good this year, but I'm not basing this off of what I think these guys might do. And Venables has had one good year in 3. He won 6 games in the Big 12. Then they won 10 games. Then their 1 year in the SEC last year, they were back to 6-7. We need to see now. They had one of the better off seasons in the country. I got to see him do it though. And they were not competitive in a lot of their games last year. Super inconsistent. I do like the move that he's going to be his own defensive coordinator now. I think that in this case, that could work for them. But again, they are the toughest schedule in America this year. Oklahoma is. I mean, they got obviously the SEC schedule. Then they have Michigan out of conference. And I mean, you talk about the opening of the SEC schedule for Oklahoma: Auburn, Texas, South Carolina, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Bama. That's tough.
Yeah, that's pretty hard. And going at the very bottom of at least Chris Phillips' list, not the very bottom, but the one second to that, Mark Stoops. You realize he's done a good job at Kentucky, especially for what Kentucky's been. But for the amount of money he's being paid, the 6-6 and 7-6 is getting a little old. And you realize if he's let go this year, and maybe I'm mistaken, but I believe the buyout's like $32 million because he signed a fresh contract 2 years ago.
Yes,
that's a lot of money at Kentucky to pay to get rid of somebody that's the winningest coach in your program's history. It's going to be interesting this season.
And I wonder in his case, maybe they will pay it to get rid of him, but it also could be a similar, and I've said this with Lincoln Riley as well, because his buyout's ridiculous at USC. It might not be you get fired. It might be you're going to take another job. Well, if we won't make you pay a buyout and we won't pay you one if you just take it. So see you later. Maybe it happens. And I think for Stoops, one scenario that could be realistic is he's an alumni at the University of Iowa. Kirk Ferentz doesn't have many years left to coach. And that, I think, could be a realistic spot where Stoops would go. Because I think he strikes me as a guy that still wants to keep coaching. I think there's gas left in the tank. And I don't think he's done. That could be a spot where he would end up.
Yeah, I think that would be ideal for both parties. And he might just want to do them a solid since, and kind of leave on good terms. But man, it'd be kind of tough to walk away from $30 million, to do somebody a favor. That's a heck of a favor, man.
And Stoops is another guy I'm higher on than most. I think the the Kentucky fans that are down on him, I kind of say shame on you. You were a backwater nothing football program before he got there. He's the winningest coach and the best coach you've ever had. He's risen the bar so much, similar to what Lane Kiffin has started to do at Ole Miss, where you weren't great, and he's raised the bar a ton. Now, I get there comes a time where just above average isn't good anymore, but I still feel like they're doing Stoops a little dirty on this list. So it's I had him at 11 on my list. So for me, it's starting from the bottom going up: Lebby, Clark Lee, Venables, Sam Pittman, Hugh Freeze, and then Stoops. Though Freeze was tough to put there, that guy's won a lot of games at different places. It was tough for me to put him low, but and I've been vocal about this on some of our shows and then our group one in here. I am really down on Freeze for how he's mismanaged their QB position the last couple of years. They've had talent everywhere and been terrible at that position. Peyton Thorne wasn't very good. And with Jackson Arnold, if you think I'm the guy that can get the best out of him, great. But Arnold was not good at another SEC team last year. So I'm not as bullish on that one as some people are.
Yeah, well, it seems like he has not done well at the most what was the last big win he had? I mean, Liberty's one thing, but even then, he lost both games to Ole Miss. I can't think of the last big game he's won that you go, man, what a great coaching job.
That's a fantastic question. I don't know. Let's see. Last year, I don't think there was one last year. Let's see. Look at their wins last year: Alabama, A&M, New Mexico, Kentucky, Louisiana, Monroe, and they beat A&M in 4 overtimes. Who actually controlled their? I'll give them credit for the A&M win last year, because it was. I remember it was that late night game, but A&M did control their own destiny to the conference title game. So I'll give him, even though that's being generous, A&M was really on a skid when that happened. Like I might be doing Hugh Freeze a solid there. And then the year before that, they didn't beat anybody good the year before. Their 3 conference wins were Mississippi State, Vandy, and Arkansas. Those 3 teams were all bad that year. So he's had one. I think he's had 1 win against a team with a winning record in conference play in 2 years.
Yeah. So we'll see. There's a lot of pressure on him this year, man. But he's got a lot of talent all over the field. So if Jackson Arnold can find a way to get consistent and accurate and get the ball to those guys, who knows? They might surprise people.
Yeah. I will say another guy I'm high on. I had him at 7. I'm a big Eli Drinkwitz fan. I think his kind of like Brian Kelly, but in a different way, where his personality grates on some people, and he has kind of that smirkiness that some people might find unlikable or they're not enthusiastic about. But Eli Drinkwitz is a good coach. He was, his 1 year at Appalachian State, they won 12 games. They beat the Gamecocks. I was in the building for that one. And then at Mizzou, he's went to a bowl game every year. Granted, they were barely above 500 his first couple of years there, but there was 11 wins 2 years ago and 10 wins last year. That's tough to do at a place like Mizzou and continue that. Now, they had some talent there. Cook was a good QB, but if he can get them winning games with Pribula and just reload, I'll be even more impressed with Drinkwitz this year. And I like him.
Yeah, overall, I'm kind of putting a bow on kind of where these coaches are from what Chris Phillips has. SEC has a lot of really good coaches. I mean, more than half are really, really talented.
I mean, most conferences, we have Mike Elko at 9 here, which is also where I had him. Most coaches, most conferences, he's a top 4 coach. He won a lot of games at Duke, and that's not an easy place to win.
No, that's true. Yeah, unless there's a basketball involved, not a place a lot of people win.
Yeah, and then the Gamecock in me is super appreciative of Shane Beamer. 3 of his 4 years, they've won more games than their expected win total. But it's tough to put him higher on the list than 8, which is where I had him, just because the guys ahead of him have either won a lot more games, or in the case of Drinkwitz, they've just been a little better the last couple of years. But after the Will Muschamp years, Beamer took over a situation that was not good in the toughest conference in the country, and he's got them immediately respectable. And entering year 5 now, people have them at least in the contention for a playoff, whether they make it or not. So I like Beamer a lot. Hopefully the Gamecocks can keep him for a long time. And heck, if we were having this conversation a year ago, we might not have thought that Billy Napier would still have a job, let alone be 10th on this list. He did a pretty solid job last year. He obviously was very good when he was at Louisiana before here. And obviously last year was his first winning season. He's exactly 500 at Florida. He was 40-12 when he was with the Cajuns. Though it's a very good record, no matter what level of football you're at. But we all looked at them last year thinking, God, with the schedule they have, they're going to be lucky to win 6 and go to a bowl game. They won 8 games last year. So I will give Billy credit. He did better last year than we expected. And now I don't think that means he can sit on his haunches. If they have a bad year this year, he'll get fired. But there's also promise there with Napier. So I think he's appropriately rated at 10.
Yeah, and he has an absolute X factor at quarterback in DJ Lagway, that he's the kind of guy that has so much talent that he alone can almost win a couple of games and make you look even better.
Yeah. Well, we'll get into the QBs after this more, but that's definitely a good point, I think. And it makes sense with just talking with Beamer. I wouldn't have Sellers and Lagway as 1 and 2 yet, but they do have the highest ceiling. There's the most potential out of those two, maybe of any QBs in the country. If they reach what they can, they're both unbelievable college players, to their credit. So I guess we went over most of my list. So I had Smart, Sark, DeBoer, Kelly, Lane Kiffin at 5, then Heupel, Drinkwitz, Beamer, Elko, Napier was where I slotted those guys in. One of the things we always do, with the coaches, I'm going to ask you 2 questions here. Who's on the hottest seat going into this season?
Yeah, well, I mean, Napier seems like his seat kind of cooled last season. I think it's probably Hugh Freeze. I think Sam Pittman's going to be gone at the end of the year anyway, because I think he's just going to kind of retire. But I think Hugh Freeze has got a very hot seat because of the expectations at Auburn. So he's the one that people are talking about the most. People are discussing, even so much so they're discussing their approach to NIL because they're so behind in so many factors. I think he's got to have the hottest seat. Although the second to him, people are not happy with Kalen DeBoer after last season. And again, in Tuscaloosa, as irrational as that is, and it is, people are just used to a different kind of standard. And look, when it comes to replacing somebody, you never want to replace the guy. You want to replace the guy who replaces the guy. You want to be the third guy.
Yeah. And that we're getting to that stage now. I wouldn't want to be the guy that replaces Kirby Smart at Georgia whenever that happens in 8 to 12 years, whoever, knows how long it'll be. Freeze is a good one, to your point there about the hottest seat. If I'm picking another one, I probably would say Napier, because I think if their schedule's a bear again, it's really tough. And if they only win 5 or 6, I think there's a chance he gets fired. And that could happen with the schedule they have, especially if Lagway gets hurt again. They're not going to be a good team if he's not playing. Now, the next question I have typically is makes people think a little more, because it's not when you expect as much. And it's also different in the SEC because it's what coach on this list do you think with a good season could get a blue blood job? Now, that's tough in the SEC because there aren't many jobs you'd leave the conference for. So whether that would be a blue blood job in the SEC or, one of the premier Big Ten programs, say Marcus Freeman goes to the NFL, Notre Dame, Clemson, etc. Which coach here do you think could potentially leave for a blue blood job? Mine, I'll kick it off. I was praising Drinkwitz before. I'm going to say him from the sense of like somebody like a Sark, Kirby, etc. Those guys aren't leaving. They're already at blue blood jobs. So you have a lot of these coaches. They're not going to leave for another job. Drinkwitz potentially could, I think. There are programs that could lure him away from Mizzou. Now, if I was Mizzou, I'd hate it. But I'm going to go Drinkwitz as a guy who potentially could maybe be that guy.
I think that's a good one. I think mine, there's two. One is Jeff Lebby, because of how difficult things are at Mississippi State. If he proved to have a good enough season, he'd be out. The second one is Shane Beamer, and I actually think it's the same school. I think both of them have ties to Oklahoma, and Oklahoma is a job that pays really, really well. Yeah. So I would not be surprised at all if Shane Beamer has another good year and Oklahoma comes open. It's kind of a natural connection.
And I've heard people that were on the inside that said, had Beamer not got the South Carolina job and been at Oklahoma one more year, he would have been the next head coach after Lincoln Riley left. So, and it makes a lot of sense if you think about it. Like he was ready, at that point and would have been the natural replacement there. God, I really hope he doesn't leave the Gamecocks. But your thought is one that has crossed my mind before. The one I don't buy that some people will throw at me, there's maybe a decent chance that Brent Pry gets fired at Virginia Tech. Would he go back there where he's an alumni and where Frank coached? I don't think he leaves for that job. Oklahoma's a lot tougher one to turn down, though, I think. Yeah. So that's a good one. If you like coaching, well, I mean, this is a fun coaching list. There's so many good ones. There's so many guys here. I mean, Sam Pittman took over one of the worst power conference situations. Chad Morris was terrible. Pittman's got them back to respectability. And I think, like you said, he's probably gone after this year. That job is better now than it was when he took over. And I think in a lot of ways, that's the mark of a good head coach. This Kentucky job will be better than when Stoops took it over. That Auburn job might not be better when Hugh Freeze leaves it than when he took over. And as awful as Harsin was, they really didn't give him a chance. There were boosters that were, wanted to stick a knife in his back from day one. So that job's not any better or worse, probably, from Freeze's perspective. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot to talk about here just because there's so many good coaches. Yeah, I don't have much to add coaching wise. Is there any other parting shots, any coaching topics you want to, are there any specific coordinator ones that, are interesting to you? I think, there were certainly a few, coordinator hires. For me, the one that I'm curious about, and I don't know if this is good or bad, but with the Gamecocks, with Dowell Logan's leaving his OC to be the head coach at Appalachian State, Mike Shula's the new O coordinator. Now, he obviously was Bama's coach before Saban, wasn't great there. He's been in the NFL a long time since then. Hopefully he's matured and is a lot better now than when he was before. But I think as a Gamecock guy, that's one of those where I'll obviously be curious as to, what to expect out of, Shula with the Gamecocks.
Yeah, that will be interesting to say. The only thing I can think of to finish up with the coaches is, Kirby Smart. I was told by a guy that used to coach with Kirby at an SEC school that Kirby will not coach as long as Nick Saban ended up coaching.
Okay.
The Kirby's it's a little bit different, and maybe if Nick Saban coached if NIL was around beforehand, Saban would have been more tired and thrown in the towel a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
But this is all pretty exhausting for Kirby because he's seen both sides of things. So I don't know how much longer he'll go.
And Kirby also strikes me as a guy that's made for TV. He's seen it all. He talks well. He's conversational. He's going to have that rapport with whoever you put him with. He's a guy that could seamlessly make that transition where you're working less and still making a lot of money. So, shall we move on to the QBs of the conference?
Let's do it.
Okay. Yeah. So, this list is another one pre-SEC, media days. Should we start from the top of the list or the bottom? What do you want to do here?
Yeah, let's start from the top, man.
Okay. So, do you agree with Garrett Nussmeier at number 1? I do. I will say I do agree with him at number 1.
I actually do agree as well. And one of the things people forget about with Nussmeier is not only is he a guy that doesn't turn the ball over a ton, but his weapons that he has this season are pretty remarkable. People forget about Barryon Brown from Kentucky. Kentucky hadn't had a quarterback in forever, and yet he consistently made plays at Kentucky. Whenever the ball finally got to him, he's going to make a huge difference for him. He gets Chris Hilton Jr. Back this season. Aaron Anderson coming back obviously this season. Nussmeier is just loaded with people around him, and that's the reason why I know some people are snarking about him having Heisman kind of moments, but with that much talent around him, if you can get the ball to those guys, they can make yards after the catch.
Yeah, no, I agree there, and he's also a guy who his pedigree is fantastic. His dad, Doug, is the offensive coordinator for the Saints, has been in the NFL for a number, going back probably 15 years. He's been between the NFL and some of the elite college jobs. He won a Super Bowl with the Eagles last year as QB coach. So I like Nussmeier. I think he'll be a top draft pick. Not the top pick, but probably a top 10 next year. And then I did have Sellers at number 2 on this list. I not trying to be a Gamecock homer. I think it's warranted, though. He certainly has things he has to get better at. The games they lost last year, especially Ole Miss, LSU, Illinois, those were teams that made him throw the ball. They stopped him running, and he wasn't able to do that in some of those games. He needs to, when the teams force him to throw and take away the run, he'll have to do a little better. I think he can. He was only a redshirt freshman last year, but I am not blindly saying he's great. He can improve, but I think 2 is an okay spot for him at this point.
Yeah, honestly, that top 4 I think is pretty solid. Overall, Sellers is really, really good, really talented, and he proved last year. He was so fun to watch. Mike, I got to tell you, though, man, there's one guy on this list that is borderline blasphemous. Can I tell you who it is?
You can. We'll see if I agree.
It's not because of the team that I cover, but it's Austin Simmons. And here's the only reason why I say that. To this date, Austin Simmons has only played one meaningful drive. Now, it was against Georgia, very good team. And he successfully, and he looked very good, but that's it. And so to say he's the 6th best is just a little tough. I don't know if I agree.
I don't hate it. Yeah, so I did have him at 6 actually on mine. I've been impressed in watching him, but it's not the same. So the one thing on this list I find ridiculous is John Mateer at 10. He was very good last year. So absolutely. I actually have Mateer at 5, Simmons at 6, and then Pavia at 7. And going back, I have Legway and Arch mixed. So I have Arch at 3, Legway at 4. And I was telling you kind of before the show, I didn't want to be one of those dudes that was, just blindly behind Arch because of the name and everything. But in studying up on him a lot lately, he looks really good. He has the tools. He has the athleticism. He can do it all. I think he's going to be pretty good. And he's under one of the best offensive coaches in the country. Sark will do what it takes, I think, to put him in the right spot. So
Yeah.
I
Agreed.
I have Arch, Legway, Mateer, Simmons is the top 6 for me.
I think as long as you have Mateer above Simmons, I think that's a good call. I just think Mateer, as you mentioned, Mateer's did really. We've seen him do it, I guess, is my big thing. And Simmons, we saw one drive, and it's against versus a team that's very good, very, very good. But that's just a lot to say 6, and especially over a guy like Mateer. So I'm glad you have Mateer there. I think that's right.
The 3 where I really had trouble separating were at 7, 8, 9, and that was Pavia, Talon Green, Marcel Reed. So I ended up having Pavia 7, Talon Green 8, Reed at 9. Talon Green's done some good things. Petrino did a good job with him last year. They ran the ball well. I think their O-line's going to be better. Their receiving group certainly, is looking all right. They've got Omega Blake, a big transfer from Charlotte, might bring him up later. But Talon Green has done all right. Maybe he shouldn't be ahead of Marcel Reed, but I did have him one spot ahead of Reed on my list in the middle there.
No, I think that's right. People forget Marcel Reed is very talented, but he's not a very accurate quarterback. Lane Kiffin, he was offered at Ole Miss. Lane Kiffin pulled his offer, and it seemed like it was just because he did not have the ability just to be accurate as he threw the ball down the field. But he's very athletic. Yeah. But I agree. I agree with you. I think Talon Green's shown a little bit more, to date. And then you just have all these other guys that you go like, man, what are we? Who knows though, Mike? We might be talking about Gunnar Stockton later on in the year of like, man, he really came on. Who knows? And
he actually, I actually had him at 15 going into this list, similar to what you. And it may be hypocritical that I had Simmons high and low on Stockton, but Stockton's played a little bit of meaningful football where he looked okay, but we haven't seen him do a lot. And their offense is also, they're risk averse, but sometimes that also means you can't showcase what you're good at. So we'll see how Stockton does there. But after, we'd Reed at 9. I actually had Blake Shapen at 10. He throws the ball well. I'm pretty high on Shapen. I think in that offense, he'll be all right. So one higher on this list. For our viewers out there that may have not seen Shapen play a lot of football, whether it was there or at Baylor, what kind of QB is he? What can we expect to see from him?
He's aggressive, and that's one of the things Jeff Lebby's mentioned in the spring practice. He said that's the thing he's talked to him most about is kind of. You remember how Brett Favre would kind of be running around in the pocket, but then he'd throw way down the field. Shapen will run around the pocket, and then he'll just run at a defender because he's not afraid, and that's great. But that's one of the reasons he's gotten injured. Yeah. And so he takes care of the ball. He's not a guy who throws it into double coverage. I mentioned Brett Favre, but he's not a guy who throws it up into double coverage. But he's has a aggressive play style, which is one of the reasons why he's been hurt so much. So if he can stay healthy, he doesn't turn the ball over, and he's very efficient. But it's just a matter of if he can stay healthy.
Good. No, that's fair. I think that's a good synopsis of him. One of the guys, we've talked about Auburn quite a bit, and I'd mentioned before, they got Jackson Arnold. He wasn't good at Oklahoma last year. Excuse me. I actually have him at 12 on this list. Where would you have Arnold in respect to some of these other mid-range guys?
Man, that's a good question.
Some of them,
yeah. I don't know. I'm just based on talent alone. I think I might put him above Marcel Reed, but I don't know. Marcel Reed overall though has had a little bit more success. I don't know. Honestly, Mike, he might just be right perfect where he is, right there in that 9 to 10
and
kind of
I
range.
might have been too low on him. Yeah, like I had him and Ty Simpson right next to each other, near the bottom there. So. And then the bottom 3 for me were Pribula, Stockton, Calzada. I don't see how you can have Calzada last, to be honest. He has not been good. And Aguilar was good last year at a decent G5 team. Pribula is one of those guys. We saw him play a bit at Penn State, but we never see him throw the ball. All he did was run it when he was in for Penn State last year. So he will have to do more this year. But, I mean, I don't think they would have brought him in and hedged all their bets on him if they didn't think he could do more.
Yeah. Yeah, as you have to think about it from a Kentucky fan perspective, can you really be like excited about Zach Calzada being the quarterback? I think he's like the least exciting out of everybody who's on the list.
Yeah, I agree. They were one of those teams who, like, up until a week or two ago, I thought they should kick the tires on Jake Retzlaff, at least bring him in to compete. I'm not saying he'd win the job, but you can't tell me he wouldn't have a decent shot to beat out Calzada. I mean, we're not dealing with a guy that's great here, but yeah. So I definitely had Calzada last, and then I had Calzada, Stockton, Pribula, and then I had Aguilar one ahead of them. So what about it? I guess it's not a what about here. Every other conference, especially the G5 ones, there's typically multiple QB battles, things going on. I feel like we don't have that here. We pretty much know all 16 starters. Now, Bama hasn't announced a guy as a starter yet. We all pretty much know it's going to be Simpson. And Tennessee probably hasn't officially announced one yet. It's going to be Aguilar. Their backup Gaston Moore transferred a couple days ago. But am I seeing it wrong, or am I right where there really aren't any battles right now? We pretty much know who all 16 starters are.
That's actually a great point. The only one I think is possible, and which to say there's only one out of 16 is pretty crazy. Yeah. The only one is Jacob Zeno at Texas A&M.
Yeah.
Because Zeno had a pretty successful career at UAB with not a ton of weapons, and now all of a sudden he's got a lot of weapons at Texas A&M. And I think he's more accurate of a quarterback than Marcel Reed. You just don't maybe have quite the athleticism. That's the only one I can see as a possibility. But even then, I think Marcel's still the favorite. You're right.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I didn't know Zeno was there. You talk about a guy who we've seen play a lot of football. He was at Baylor in 2019, a year before COVID. So this guy is now this will be year 7 of college football for Jacob Zeno, believe it or not. So he had 3 at Baylor, 3 at UAB. He's played 30 career games, oddly enough. So, yeah, that's a good one, though, especially at a school where, like you had mentioned, you have a guy like Reed who there's one glaring weakness, and that's accuracy, but that's a big deal. So I think that's a good one. Now, one smaller segment where we've talked about but never spent a ton of time has been in college fantasy football. We're going to have some episodes on that coming up, and then we're getting to that season. We always mention a couple guys who our listeners and viewers who are into that should look for, some under the radar ones. So I'll kind of kick that one off. I think running back wise, 2 that I want are, maybe people to look into. Seth McGowan at Kentucky, like we mentioned, I don't know that they're going to be able to throw the ball effectively, which means McGowan might be getting a lot of touches and carries at Kentucky, depending on what they're doing. Now, the game script might get away from them, because I don't know how much they'll be winning, especially late in games. But I think early on, McGowan will be getting carries. And then Cedric Alexander at Vandy is a much deeper sleeper, but a guy who could have fantasy value. Who are some running backs, you think in the conference that people, should look into or names to watch for them?
I think that the first one to think about that is maybe not being discussed at the moment, which might be a sleeper, is in Starkville. So if Mississippi State is not able to throw the ball effectively, Fluff Bothwell might be your guy. It's a guy who averaged 7.5 yards a carry last year, and is going to have a really, really good compliment in Davon Booth, who had 800 yards last season at Mississippi State. one of those two guys, kind of splitting the carry might be kind of tough, but Fluff might be a guy to be able to get a lot of yards. But also, Caden Durham there at LSU is a guy that, since there's so many weapons through the air, I mean, you think about it, what a weapon he might be, being able to catch something out of the flat, but also just running the ball. He's a guy who could be a gadget in multiple different ways.
Yeah, and was decent at catching the ball last year as well. So that's a good one to bring up. Then at receiver, there's two names. Actually, there's three. Two of them we've already talked about. So you brought up Berrien Brown. He's not real unknown, but I think could be a big guy in that offense. And then a little deeper, Omega Blake at Arkansas, was at South Carolina, was at Charlotte last year with the Razorbacks, losing the guys they did. I think he could be a good target for Talon Green. And then my last deep sleep receiver guy was a Mississippi State guy, Jordan Mosley. I think could be one to look for if they throw the ball well. So,
yeah, I think all of those are very good options. Like, when I want to say the most talented wide receiver, but I just don't know if they're going to be able to get the ball. Mario Craver at A&M and Kevin Conception at A&M.
yeah.
Both just came off of freshman seasons that were really impressive. And I hate to pick on Marcel Reed. I just don't know if they're going to be able to get the ball to them. But if they can, both of those guys can take the top off of a defense and get you a lot of points if you're looking to select someone.
Concepcion was very good at NC State 2 years ago, and then last year at NC State, they had a lot of QB problems, and he got dinged up, so was much less effective last year. And then portal to A&M this year, so good ones. Yeah, no, that's awesome. Well, now you're transition to one of our usual sections. This is a projected finish for the conference. In looking at this, I think in the middle there, it's going to be so tight, and it might be tight all over. I mean, the conference itself is just a bloodbath, and so much of it, if you're looking at slotting them in, that schedule can play a big role. I mean, I'll pick up Texas was awesome last year. They also had the benefit of the schedule last year too. So, things like that could happen. I definitely would not have Alabama one like Chris Phillips did. They're going to be good at a lot of positions. A lot of teams are going to be good at a lot of positions. And it's a tough one because in looking at who I picked to win the conference, I almost would always pick a team with a returning quarterback, but Bama, Texas, Georgia all have new QBs. It's tough to say one of those three won't win the conference. I think the next bet would probably be LSU. Some people might say South Carolina or Ole Miss. I don't know that I wouldn't, but what are your thoughts about, the projected finish here at the top?
Yeah, at the top, man, I have one team and one team in mind only, and it's LSU. I think this is, and we'll get a little bit more in during the hot take portion, but I have LSU at the very, very tip top. Picking Alabama at the top is I don't know, man. That's a little bold, Mr. Phillips.
I agree. Yeah. So, and looking down, it's anywhere. If you look at the teams here, I think Florida's ranked scandalously high here, but Ole Miss, A&M, Carolina, Missouri, Oklahoma, Tennessee, I think those five, it could be in any iteration. They're all teams that we have some questions about, but they're also really good at some things. So I think there could be a lot of movement in there. I might have Oklahoma a little higher, but again, their schedule, toughest schedule in the country. So that's tough to say. Near the bottom, the Vandy people are thinking I'm just a big hater. I'm probably putting them at 14 on this list. Heck, maybe Kentucky will even be better than them. I'm going to see if Vanderbilt plays Kentucky. Kentucky at Vanderbilt, November 22nd. So it's Kentucky's last conference game because they have Louisville rivalry week. So I hate to have the Bulldogs last, Landon. I can't pick them anywhere else at this time, though. I would love to see him finish ahead of Kentucky or Vandy, but it's not the safe pick at this point either.
Of course. No, I think that's where the safe money is. I think you're exactly right, Mike.
Yeah.
However, when I got the privilege of having a vote at SEC Media Days for this projected order of finish.
Good for you.
And I did not have State at the very bottom, but it wasn't because of my biases. I had them second to the very bottom. But at the dead last, I actually had Kentucky. And a part of it is what you and I've already talked about. Yeah. I just don't understand, like bringing in Zach Calzada after they already struggled at quarterback, and in my opinion, I think they might regress. And with all the pressure and talk that Stoops has already had on him, and then also at factoring in the schedule, I just do not think that they finish anywhere other than dead last. And I think this is just going to kind of be it for them. But I have Mississippi State second to last.
Yeah. If say that trajectory happens. And Kentucky say at one point Kentucky's 3-7 after 10 games. Do they axe Stoops before the season's over? Do you think that's in play, or do they give him the courtesy of letting him finish out the regular season?
Yeah, I think they would do the thing where they say this will be the last year and kind of let him finish out the season. Yeah. He's meant too much to him.
He has. I agree with you there. Yeah, and the one that Arkansas to me has like the biggest bandwidth. They could surprise and be decent, but God, they lost so many guys in the portal last year. There is a scenario where they're 15 or 16 on this list at Arkansas, and everything just implodes on them. Like that could happen with that roster being totally overhauled. And I'm lower on Vandy than most, but that's nothing new. I need to see it again from them. The schedule for them is not much easier. Especially you look at Vandy week 2 and 3 at Virginia Tech, at South Carolina. So they'll win their FCS game week 1, no doubt. Then game 4, they got Georgia State, who beat them last year. Now I doubt that'll happen again because they'll be up for that game. Utah State's a G5 team. Vandy should beat them. Bronco Mendenhall's a heck of a coach, though, took over there. And then we get, obviously they had Carolina early, but then you get into the rest of the SEC. And Vandy's first 2 games at Bama, LSU at home. So it's not too kind for them. So I'm a little lower on them. Auburn's one. You talked about Auburn probably more than I did. I am in grab your popcorn mode for Auburn because I feel like there's a scenario where they impress and there is a scenario where Jackson Arnold is worse or what we thought he was, and it all goes wrong for Auburn. Who knows?
Yeah, that's one that they could kind of overachieve and surprise a lot of people. I can just see that going both ways, like dumpster fire or completely proving everybody wrong.
I am absolutely fascinated for Auburn's week 1 game at Baylor because I've been looking at it for a while. Baylor's going to be pretty salty. In fact, I had a Texas Tech guy on a couple weeks ago for our Big 12 episode. He picked Baylor to go to the conference title game. And on offense, Sawyer Robertson is Baylor's QB. And they have a good running back in Washington. They're going to give Auburn a tough time. And if he loses week 1 at Baylor, people are going to start talking. It's not going to be a pleasant time around the Plains. So that'll be interesting.
Yeah, I think you're right. And by all means, a lot of points they are already talking. And so it's just going to be added to it.
Yeah. Putting you on the hot seat. Well, we're not doing our hot takes yet, but projection, what 2 teams will play for the conference title game?
It's going to be LSU in Texas, which will be fantastic. I think LSU's a lock in there, and Texas is really, really good.
Yeah, I always hate it for the audience's sake when I agree with people. I'm actually agreeing with you on those 2 picks. I am very high on LSU, Texas, so wouldn't shock me if Bama squeezes in there. I'm a little lower on Georgia this year, but I'm going with Texas and LSU as well. The Sun Belt guy I agreed with. Big 12, we had two totally separate ones. And then Conference USA was easy because you only have two good teams in WKU and Liberty. But now the relevant question for this conference too, what SEC teams make the playoff?
Oh boy, that's a great question. I mean, last season, I think SEC got 3 in. Am I correct?
Georgia, Texas, Tennessee.
Yeah,
and the Big Ten got 4. I think the SEC gets 4 this year, but it's your floor right now. I will answer after you do.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I think it's LSU and Texas are your two that get in for sure. I cannot put Texas A&M in there, and I know that they get a lot of hype, and I did a preview episode for them today, and on their roster this season, I think it's 77% are either 5 stars or 4 stars on this roster. Unbelievable amount of talent.
Jeez,
but you can't, every time I buy into them, they burn me. So I'm not going to do that. But I have a hard time thinking that Georgia will not get in there. So I think it's going to be 3 once again. But the question is, which team's going to be the outside shot? Like, is Oklahoma going to really, really have a good season? As South Carolina, as you mentioned, is going to be interesting.
So I'm going to go 4. I'm going to go Texas, LSU, and then I am going to pick Georgia to be that team looking out. I'm going to go Alabama and Ole Miss is the next 2. I think Ole Miss is one of those teams that the schedule looks decent for them this year. They're not one of the tougher ones in the conference, and if we get a good season out of Simmons, Lane's a heck of a coach, and now they disappointed last year. Getting to the playoffs is the hump that Kiffin has to get over because he hasn't done it yet, and that will be a disappointment until they do. I think they get in this year. 9-3, I think, is attainable. Decent chance you get in with 9 wins. You may not. That could be dependent on if more than one ACC team get in, if we get 1 or 2 Big 12 teams. Certainly Notre Dame is a wild card. We expect Notre Dame to get in, but it's not a guarantee. And then I also think think about last year, SEC had 3, Big Ten had 4. I think the Big Ten only gets 3 in this year, which is part of why I picked 4 here. I think only Penn State, Oregon, Ohio State get in from the Big Ten. So kind of looking at it holistically. So I would go Texas, LSU, Bama, Ole Miss. Yeah. Now
I wouldn't be shocked if Lane Kiffin finally gets a team in. Yeah. I have trouble so far with the Simmons thing, like just for sure saying he's there, but obviously he's certainly a talented enough coach to get him in. Give me just a second, Mike. I'm changing camera angles. Just a second.
Okay. As we are waiting for Landon to do this, we're going to move forward to our hot take portion after this, but want to thank all of you for being here. As all of you know, you can find me Thursday nights on SEC After Dark. Landon, thank you to have you back. We'll move to our final segment where, your hot or bold take, unpopular take, whatever you want to call it. What is yours that you have for the audience?
I got to tell you, Mike, this is something I feel strongly about. I've thought a lot about, especially after media days. LSU is going to win the national championship.
Okay.
With the great
take. I love it.
The great coach of Brian Kelly, Nussmeier having a ton of experience. And again, this season, I think he has the most talent around him he's ever had. On the defensive side of things, if they could finally get Harold Perkins back to his old self, you also return Whit Weeks, who's another all-SEC defender, and a secondary that's not quite the stars that they've had in the past, but is better than last year with the transfer portal people that they got in. I am picking LSU to win it all.
I love it. That's a very bold take. I don't even know who I would pick to win it right now. If I had to pick a national title winner right now, I would probably waffle between Penn State or Clemson. I'm very high on Clemson this year. But I love that's one of the better, like, the conviction you have in your bull take is way more than most people. So I really enjoy that. But that is where we will leave the audience at this time. So all of you, I want to thank you for watching episode 9 for us, where we dove into the SEC and the Mississippi State Bulldogs. We're pleased to have Landon Tucker here from the My Dogs Are Barking podcast. I'll link all of his info in the retweets, so you'll be able to go and follow him and get in touch with his info and where he's, putting his videos out, Twitter, YouTube, etc. You should go watch his interview with Thomas Hammock, very good one. And Landon, any parting shots for the audience?
Man, again, guys, if I could just give you some hope, just hold on a little bit longer. College football is almost here. The greatest time of the year. Would love for you guys to keep up. Obviously, keep up with Mike. He's doing a lot of really good stuff on this channel, as you guys already know. And also come give us a follow on MPW Digital. It's the most downloaded podcasting network in the state of Mississippi, and
Awesome.
several good shows on there. And man, we're just happy to be a part of it. So we're almost football season. Keep holding on.
Thank you. And Landon, want to thank you again for being here. And everybody have a fantastic night.